Hello, and thank you for joining me for this review. As the thumbnail will indicate, is for A Time of Changes by Robert Silverberg. I am unable to wave the book around in your face because I ended up reading it in audio. But before we dig into Robert Silverberg, a deep hole to dig, let's be honest, let me share with you my current favourite geeky t-shirt. You will either understand or you won't. So, I've been reading a bit of Robert Silverberg recently, and several people have said to me, A Time of Changes. That was my favourite Silverberg. It really inspired me. Some of them even said I've never read any other Silverberg, but I really loved it. I did not remember having ever read A Time of Changes, and I looked for it. I looked for it for several months before realising that my chances of finding it in the wild were Buckley's. And so when I found it on audiobook for the library, I borrowed the audiobook. The audiobook is confusing in that it has the image that I've used for thumbnail, or will use, current Deborah, future Deborah, on the thumbnail of this review, which was, I believe, the image that was used on the original hardcover. My image has a footnote saying that this audiobook has been read by Grover Gardner. I believe that to be incorrect. I believe my version of audio was from Blackstone Audiobooks, and at the end it says that it's read by Tom Parker. I just want to say that in advance because I am deeply conflicted about who read me this bedtime book, as it were, and the narration was really, really good and suited to the story. Okay, so this book was the one that won Silverberg the Nebula Award in 1971. It was also nominated for Hugo and Locus. I'm not sure how it went with that. And Silverberg had been passed over for the Nebulas a couple of times before this, so this was a big thing. 1971, let us remember things were a bit different in 71. And Silverberg was very fond of exploring intense social issues. He was into exploring drugs and sex and self. And this book does all of those things extensively. It certainly explores the self very intensively. The drugs are kind of a side effect, and the rest of it, it's Silverberg. If you've ever read much Silverberg, you can brace yourself because you know how this is going to go. Okay, so let's just start with the actual what it's about, the plot summary, as it were, and then let's talk about how I felt about it, which is really what a review is to a certain extent, because all the plot summary stuff, if you really wanted to, you could go online and find it. Goodreads, Wikipedia, wherever. So this novel is told in the epistolary style. I think I'm saying that right. I might not. It's not something you use in everyday life. Basically, it is a journal style that is being given to us by our primary character, who's Kinal Derival, and he is writing all this marooned in a desert where hunters are after him. And what he does is he tells us all of the things that have led to him being in this hot, dry desert, being pursued for terrible and uncanny crimes. And it doesn't really feel like info dumping. We just sort of have Silverberg laying out this entire society and this whole planet in front of us. And to me, it felt as if the book fell into three roughly separate sections, and that first one, where he's explaining it, was actually my favourite. I've seen other people describe that as the very slow part of the book, and that it got better later. But I really like this early world building, where Kinal Derival tells us all about the world of Bothan. Bothan was settled by Earthmen who... Did they crash or did they land? I'm not sure. So they landed on the planet of Bothan, and you end up with mainly on a single continent, which has been settled. The continents all have names, and I've just found the name. The one continent that has been entirely occupied by Earthmen is called Velada Bothan, and they settled a millennium earlier, according to this one review. So Velada Bothan is separated into a whole heap of fiefdoms or kingdoms or principalities. I've seen some people describe this as a monarchy, but the way I see Silverberg describing this, it isn't so much a monarchy. You've got all these different states, and most of them are ruled by hereditary lines, but not necessarily. Now, Kin Alderavel is actually the second son of the ruler. I can't remember the name he uses. He doesn't use king or prince or anything like that. He uses a brand new exciting name that he invented of his particular area, and he grows up desperate for his father's love and feeling all alone. Now, when Earthmen settled Bothan, they created a society which is incredibly strict and conformist in one particular way, which is to follow the dictates of the Covenant as the Earthmen, or shortly after the society created. In this society, the one most horrible crime, the most terrible thing you could do is have a self. So the two bad words that no one ever uses are I, me, my. Saying anything like that is kind of like the F-bomb was about, 30, 40 years ago. And the crime of self-bearing is the worst of crimes. It's when you actually exalt yourself, talk about yourself, like yourself, something like that. And they've created this very stratified, very isolated individuals who still interact in society on a very close basis. You've got these specific ways in which you can relate and emote and self-identify. Every individual can't actually get close to their family or their wives or husbands. All of that sort of intimacy is frowned upon. Instead, at birth, every person is provided with a bond sister and a bond brother. These apparently create a subset where emotional self-exploration, as long as you don't use the horrible words of I and my, is okay. And the bond sister and the bond brother are meant to know you as well as you know yourself, though you're still not allowed to talk about yourself. Everything you say is one feels, or one. You are a one. Now, it's an interesting quasi-religious society that Silverberg has created. And for me, the draw card for speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, anything else, was always the exploration of things you can't really explore in normative fiction or in non-fiction. And I think that's very much what Silverberg has done here. So Kin Alderavel grows up as the son of a ruler, and he's got his bond brother and he's got his bond sister, and we find that as he reaches maturity, he actually falls in romantic love with his bond sister, but this is one of the most hideous types of relationships. He can't confess it, etc., etc. This level of isolation really informs Kin Alderavel's entire life, as he tells it to us many years later in his 30s, hiding out in this hut. Bear in mind that Bothan seems to have a different cycle to ours, so I can't remember what the difference is, but I feel like it's a 7 to 9 basis. I think 7 years, Earth years, would equivalent to 9 years Bothan, but I could be wrong about that. I didn't pay too much attention. This isolation for him, for our Prince Kinal, ends when he goes hunting these hornbills with his father and a huge hunting party and his bond brother. He feels that this hunting party may be a chance for him to bond closer with his father, but in actual fact it's kind of the ending to his whole childhood, as a hornbill kills his father, and his slightly older brother has to ascend to the rulership. Now, because of the truly convoluted society, the ruler can't have a younger brother until he's firmly established in his rulership with sons and everything to succeed him, so that the brother is no longer a threat. As a result, Kinal Daraval takes to his heels and flees across the border. He flees into another country which is quite different, the one that his mother came from, and he hopes to find a welcome there from his mother's family, but instead he's cast out yet again. He goes off, he works as a lumberjack for a while and a few other things. I think he's a sailor for a while as well. And so he has a chance of growing into his own maturity in his own self. To that extent, you could think of this as a... what's the name for that type of book where you grow from boy to man, girl to woman? You know what I mean. It could be one of those types of books. But since it's all being told from the perspective of a 30-year-old, which was probably to us, I don't know, 40 to 50-year-old, maybe 40 or 50, it feels like a reflection on the past. Now, Kinal Daraval eventually ends up in the same country that his bond sister originally came from. He becomes established there, and he manages, through that connection with his bond sister, who eventually comes back there to live as well, to become an important man in society. He's not a lord or anything like that, but he's an important man in the port, and he's got a happy life as we see happy lives there in this particular world, which to most of us would sound like a nightmare. He's also married. When he first got there, his bond sister wasn't around, and he walks into the foyer of his bond sister's father's house, and he thinks he sees his bond sister. He rushes up to her, halal, delighted to see her because he's dying for that sort of communion and ability to unburden himself. She turns around, it turns out to be Hallam's cousin, and Kinal ends up marrying her, pretty much, we gather, because she reminds him of Hallam, and Hallam is unobtainable. Even though she's his bond sister, they're very close, they know each other well. Physically speaking, she's unobtainable. There's no way he could ever marry her. So he ends up in a essentially loveless marriage that's okay. He has children, they share their life, he makes a lot of money, it all seems very comfortable, and that is pretty much the first part of the book. There's a lot of detail in the world building there, much of which I haven't gone into. Now, for the second part of the book, I was really not that enthused about it at first, and thinking back on it, there's a lot that I didn't like as well. This, however, is the part where some other readers have said that that's when it really took off for them, where it stopped being boring. I like the world building. I didn't find it boring. Now, in this second part of the book, with Kinal Daraval as a wealthy, influential man around the port who's involved in shipping and all these other things and can do what he likes pretty much, an Earthman intrudes. This Earthman is called Schweitz, and we've been hearing little snippets of hints about Schweitz in the future having brought Kinal Daraval to the point where he is in the desert. When he comes on the scene, we find that Daraval has always been fascinated by Earthmen and longed to know more about them. And Schweitz and him end up forming an acquaintanceship very fast. And as an Earthman, Schweitz knows the local regulations against saying I or me, they're dirty words. But soon, quite fast, he comes into a level of intimacy with Kinal Daraval so that he is actually using those phrases. Now then, the crux of the whole book and the crux of Daraval ending up in the desert and losing his life comes about. One of the other continents on this world is called Sumarabothan. I think it's Sumarabothan. And in Sumarabothan, we understand there's no civilization, there's a whole lot of jungle. But from this jungle, Schweitz lets Kinnell know comes a drug which will open your mind and let you talk mind to other people. Now Schweitz is interested in it here because he's searching for godhood, or he's searching for a belief in God, which Kinnell and his entire society don't doubt. In fact, Kinnell has a lot of gods. It's a bit more like Hinduism, I would say, than a typical monotheistic religion, in that you've got gods of innocence, gods of kindness, gods of travel, and at different times you might worship all of them. The way you worship them is unique, as far as I know, to this story. Now, because people are so introverted and self-contained in this society, in order to keep it stable, the people who wrote the covenant wrote in a specific type of religion. You've got all these temples, but you've got these authorized drainers. Now, what a drainer does, it's a combination between a psychologist and a priest. So you go to these drainers, and for a set fee, you tell them all your troubles, but you're not telling them. You're actually telling a god. So you start the session by saying which god you're addressing. Kinnell's leaving the city, fleeing his brother early on in the story, and he stops by a drainer's house and says he wants to talk to the god of travelers, for example. And the drainer sets up all this paraphernalia to the right color and the right images and the right mirrors and everything. And then Kinnell bares his soul, says all the unthinkable things, all his thoughts and fears, his lust for his bond sister, his self-doubt, everything he wants to. And the drainers, of course, are safe confessors, in the same way that priests in Christianity keep the confessional and don't share details, or perhaps, as we'd say that a physician has to keep client confidentiality. Why did I go into drainers right at this second? Oh yes, we're off to Sumar Bothan to pick up this drug. And they do that. It's a fairly interesting journey. The way in which Kinnan and Schweitz acquire this drug is really important to the storyline, which you should probably read if you're interested by Silverberg or anything that I've said. So this sense of intense and undoubting belief in godhood is the reason Schweitz is taking the drug and sharing it with Kinnell. He's hoping that by their two minds coming together into a single, all-encompassing, we know everything about each other type sort of thing, he's going to finally be able to understand deep in himself what it means to believe in a god and perhaps share in that ability. Schweitz has very strongly influenced Kinnell into wanting that sort of closeness, which one can't help suspecting is more to do with Kinnell Daraval's incredibly lonely and isolated upbringing than anything else. That is me, Deb, omnivorous reader, 2025, saying that. If I'd have read this when I was 18 or 19, I think my take-home conclusion would have been different. Now this second section, with Schweitz haranguing Kinnell Daraval into doing things that he really at first didn't really want to, it seemed an unlikable section. I thought the writing was as good as the first, but it seemed to me very disingenuous in many regards. Schweitz was, I think, written to be unlikable, or maybe he was written to be brash and a go-getter, I don't know. But whatever he was written to be, he felt inauthentic to me. I also thought it was unlikely that Kinnell Daraval, for all that he is all the way through a fairly innocent character, it seemed incredibly naive to me that an understanding man of society would have, a grown-up understanding man of society would have acted in the ways he did. However, humans are always astonishing me, so maybe that's believable. The fact that Schweitz seemed cunning and dishonest ultimately didn't much matter. After he served his part in the plot, he just vanishes in a way that I've got to say seems a little bit abrupt, like Silverberg just created him for this one specific purpose and then didn't know what to do with him. I can think of a few things. Okay, after that, Schweitz does what he's doing, but Kenard Darrow has discovered this way of opening his mind and becoming one with other people and sharing individuality. The words I and me and I and me are used repeatedly, and it reminds me of another book. I just can't put my finger on it, and I think that's a Silverberg as well, where someone keeps repeating words that were bad words in our society in an effort to think back. Tower of Glass? Probably not Tower of Glass. Anyway, this idea of repeating an oath in order to normalize it is a good thing that Silverberg, it's a good writing device that Silverberg utilizes quite often. Okay, so did I like this book? Yes, I did. There was a lot about it that I did like. As always, I love Silverberg's creative, inventive societies, his world building. I think there is no doubt that he uses science fiction in the most speculative of ways to examine things about society. In this case, the primary thing that he is examining, that to my mind would be very restrictive societies, religious, and he may be having a go at Puritans. I don't really know enough about American Puritans, but I feel like this might be a focus of his. And I love science fiction being used in this way. I actually probably know more about some aspects of history from the science fiction that was written to critique it than I do about actually reading history. That's not a good thing. I shouldn't advertise that. So, because Kendall grew up emotionally isolated and unhappy, his way of rejecting society and moving forward, this is a common theme that Silverberg and others use to examine social mores. And as an adult reader, I can't help wondering if you actually could go to Bothan and examine the various people in society, how many of them would be actually unhappy? Or is this a function of Kendall Darrow growing up in the upper class, his father's a ruler, in this very specific cohort? Would Bond brothers and Bond sisters really be that as untouchable, remote, and idealized in people living in the slums? I can't tell. This is a very, very small picture of this world that seems, the way it's written, to be huge and have a lot of options that you can explore within it. So, using the medium of diary to open the self-isolation of the main character, I wonder how much of this was actually a reflection of Silverberg's own explorations from the 60s and 70s. I think that it's no secret. I think he's talked about using drugs in those times for different effects. And people who know more about LSD than I do describe the drug that comes from Sumara Bothan as being very similar to LSD. It's a white powder. You dissolve it in fluid. It takes about half an hour to take effect. Apparently these are all things. And then you feel like your mind's opening and becoming one with the universe. Now, oh yes, I made a small comment here in the difference between reading and listening to a book. Throughout this book, the self-bearing, which is meant to be the most horrible thing in society, it's actually a crime. You can be convicted of self-bearing. I took it to mean self-bearing, as in I bear this notebook in your direction. No, apparently when I read up on this book, having finished it, self-bearing is exposing yourself, like opening your heart to someone. So that was interesting. Another thing I've seen criticized about this book is the tech level. The tech level is not the point that Silverberg was making, and he doesn't go into it too much. This world was settled by Earth people who came there in a spaceship, and they brought tech. This world has telephones, it has ground cars, it's got some other technologies, but it also has very manual ways of lumberjacking and sailing and other things. So you've got this combined society. I had no problem with any of that because it was not his point. It was not the point he was making. The background, whether it was a ground car or whether it was a sailing boat, was just background to the story that Kinnell is telling about his final downfall. So, all in all, this was a really good book and I did enjoy it. It is chock-a-block full of different thoughts and information, and I think I agree with some other people who've said that at its core, the novel is all about what is self, what is humanity. That's something that many great authors, including PKD, were into. They were all about what is the person in themselves as they see themselves. How do you relate to other people around you? So Kinnell Daraval, after he's shared this powder with a lot of people in his home country, he ends up with this group that are his friends, and are his friends in a way that no other people have been before, because they've been in each other's thoughts. They know how they feel about each other, about themselves. And by now he's used the drug a lot. Is he having side effects? Maybe. Silverberg's a bit hands-off with that information, but there's a few things that he does that aren't very smart and indicate that maybe Silverberg is talking about how extended drug use can change a person, or not. Maybe I'm just reading into it. Yes, so this is more about what is self, what is human, how people relate to each other. When is it a good thing? When is it a bad thing? And one thing that I do really like about this book is any single thing that we're told. For example, from the start, we know that Hallam, his bond sister, ended up dead. Because right from the beginning, he talks about the fact that she isn't alive anymore and something terrible happened to her. When we approach that, and don't worry, I'm not going to spoil all of that, we've got this event where she does a thing that ends up in her being dead. We've got Kinnell Daraval going, oh, maybe she did it because of this, maybe she did it because of that. But the way Silverberg has written this event is open enough that I can think about it and go, well, no, I can think of a few other reasons she might have done that too. And I think that's a very good indication of just how genius Silverberg could be. That said, I don't always love Silverberg. There's almost always something or some things in his writing that are questionable. They are questionable now in the 2020s in terms of his approaches to certain things. And they were questionable when I first read them as well. So, but he always makes you think, and he has clearly, obviously thought about what he's writing a lot himself. So I love that. I would give this book a 4 stars, not 5. It is not flawless. It is far from flawless in my opinion. It's got a few pitfalls, which I think most people reading that today for the first time as an adult will find pitfalls. But despite that, the narration was perfect. Whoever it was, whether it was Grover Gardner, as the picture actually says, it's written on the cover, that the one I was looking at, or Tom Parker, as the narrator says. It's hard to decide. Whoever it was, there's a deep, well-paced, good cadence, almost baritone voice. It was perfect to describe Kinnell Daraval's journey. So 4 stars for this from me. I would probably have loved this a lot more and been a lot less critical if I'd encountered it about when I was 19 to 24. Even as it is, this is a book that I will be thinking about over and over. And should I come across a copy in the wild, I will almost certainly buy it with the intention of reading it again one of these days. I will especially do it if I come across one of those amazing copies with some of those beautiful panther covers with skeletal hornbills attacking skeletons and all that other stuff. Never judge a book by its cover, right? But enjoy the covers anyway. Okay, this has been a long and rambly one, but I haven't been reading much science fiction this month, and I have been missing it. So, great to have another classic science fiction under my belt. Thank you very much for watching, if you still are. Do the liking and the subscribing, but especially the commenting. And read good books. Always read good books.